Most people believe that power is something you wear, a tailored suit, a heavy watch, or the loud, booming voice at the head of a boardroom table. They think power is visible. They are wrong. Real power is the thing you don't see. It is the floor beneath your feet that you take for granted every single day. It is the foundation. And if there is one thing I understand better than anyone else in this city, it is the architecture of a secret.
My husband, Shane, is a man of the light. He is a brilliant executive, a man who believes in merit, hard work, and the polished surface of the American dream. I love him for that. I love the way he wakes up every morning believing the world is a fair place where the best man wins. But I also know that dreams are fragile and fair play is a luxury. While Shane manages the visible world of corporate mergers and quarterly projections, I manage the shadows. I am the architect of our silence. Years ago, I started a company called Bam Bam. On paper, it is a boutique property management firm, quiet, professional, and entirely anonymous. To the public, Bam Bam is just another name on a high-end lease. To me, it is my invisible empire. I didn't build it because I didn't trust Shane. I built it because I understood a truth my husband has never had to face. A woman with her own foundation doesn't have to beg for solid ground. I learned the art of the 1031 tax exchange early on. While other women were investing in trends, I was leveraging small overlooked properties into high-value assets. I moved capital like a ghost, deferring taxes and reinvesting every cent until I could afford the crown jewel, a penthouse on the east side that overlooks the very buildings Shane works in. I didn't tell him, not out of malice, but because in the circles we move in, information is the only currency that matters, and a secret is only a secret if you are the only one holding the key. For 3 years, that penthouse sat at the top of my ledger, a silent generator of wealth. And then, Bam Bam found the perfect tenant. His name was May Gay. When I first saw his file, I didn't see a renter. I saw a warning. May Gay was a mountain of a man, a North Korean strategist with a reputation that made CEOs break out in a cold sweat. He was what the industry calls a high-value fixer. He was the man boards of directors hired when they wanted to dismantle a company from the inside out. He was physically imposing, his neck and arms covered in intricate, dark tattoos that he never bothered to hide, as if he wanted you to know exactly how dangerous he was before he even spoke. But it wasn't his tattoos that caught my breath. It was his current contract. May Gay had just been hired as the lead consultant for Shane's firm. The man sleeping in my penthouse was the same man being paid millions to decide if my husband was expendable.
Shane came home one Tuesday evening, his face tight with a kind of stress he couldn't quite mask. He told me the board had brought in a heavy hitter to evaluate the firm's efficiency. He said he wanted to invite the man over for dinner to show him that the company's leadership was grounded, stable, and worth keeping. His name is May Gay, Shane said, pouring a drink with a hand that shook just slightly. He's intimidating, Deb. He looks like he's seen 100 wars, but the board treats him like a god. I smiled, my face a mask of supportive, wifely concern. Then we should show him the best we have to offer, Shane. Invite him. I'll handle the rest.
When May Gay walked through our front door, the air in the room seemed to thin. He was even larger in person, a silent, granite force in a $5,000 suit. He greeted Shane with a cold, professional nod, but when he looked at me, there was a flicker of something else, a calculation. He looked at our art, our furniture, and the way I carried myself, with the polite indifference of a man who thought he had already seen everything I had to offer. He thought I was just the wife of the man he was about to destroy.
As I served dinner, I practiced the art of information asymmetry. I let them talk. I listened to Shane explain his vision for the company, and I watched May Gay watch him. May Gay wasn't looking for growth potential. He was looking for a crack in the armor.
Then, as May Gay reached for his water, His cuff shifted. I saw it, a small, encrypted digital key fob attached to his belt. It wasn't a standard security pass. It was a high-level entry device for a rival investment group. The very people who had been trying to initiate a hostile takeover of Shane's firm for months. In that moment, the dinner party turned into a hunt. Maguey wasn't there to fix the company. He was a double agent, hired to sabotage Shane's reputation so the rivals could buy the firm for pennies on the dollar. I didn't react. I didn't drop a plate or miss a beat in the conversation. I simply refilled his glass and made a mental note of the serial number on that fob. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to the Bam Bam portal. I knew that in property law, your greatest weapon isn't a threat, it's a technicality. Every residential lease contains a quiet enjoyment and a non-residential use clause. I authorized a routine, high-priority safety inspection of Unit 12. I didn't need to find a crime. I just needed to find a breach, and I found it. Maguey had registered his private offshore consulting firm to the penthouse address. He was using a residential property to run a shadow brokerage. It was a clear, undeniable violation of the zoning laws and his contract with Bam Bam. I didn't call Shane. I didn't call the police. I contacted Maguey directly. We met in a quiet, high-end coffee shop 2 blocks from his office. When he walked in, he still had that aura of untouchable power. He sat down, looking at his watch as if my time was a debt he didn't want to pay. "I'm a busy man, Mrs. Weston." His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. I didn't say a word. I simply slid a folder across the table. Inside was the Bam Bam eviction notice, the proof of his unregistered business, and a photograph of the rival key fob he had worn to my dinner table. The silence that followed was the most expensive thing in the room. I watched the realization move across his face. The moment he understood that the woman he had dismissed at dinner was the person who held the deed to his life.
"You're a strategist, Maguey," I said, my voice calm, leveled. "So you understand the concept of a total loss. If I file this eviction for fraud, your reputation is dead. Your contracts are void. You won't just lose your apartment, you'll lose your career." He looked at the folder, then at me. For the first time, he saw me. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who owns the foundation you're standing on," I replied. "And I'm the person who is giving you an exit strategy. You're going to go back to that boardroom. You're going to deliver a report that exposes the corruption of the board members who hired you. You're going to save Shane's position, and in return, Bam Bam will forget this technicality ever happened." Maguey leaned back, a slow, predatory respect appearing in his eyes. He was a man who understood power, and he had just met his landlord. On Monday, the board meeting was a bloodbath, but not for Shane. Maguey pivoted with the grace of a professional, turning the axe on the very people who had handed it to him. Shane came home that night looking like a man who had been reborn. He told me the firm was safe, that he had been promoted, and that Maguey had turned out to be the most honorable man he'd ever met. I smiled and kissed his cheek. Maguey is still in Unit 12. He's a model tenant now, quiet, respectful, and always punctual. Shane thinks we got lucky. He thinks the world is fair, and I let him believe it. After all, silence isn't just a secret, it's the most valuable asset you can own.
The arrival of a new tenant is usually a matter of paperwork and logistics, a series of automated notifications from Bam Bam that flicker across my screen before being filed away. But when the file for Unit 12 landed in my inbox, the atmosphere in my home office seemed to shift, growing heavy with a tension I couldn't yet name. His name was Maguey. The background check was a void of redacted details and high-level clearances. He was a North Korean national with a global footprint, a strategist who operated in the high-stakes vacuum where corporate interest meets absolute ruthlessness. In my world, he was what we call a high-value fixer, but in the parlance of the streets, he was an executioner. He didn't arrive with a suitcase.
He arrived with a reputation for dismantling empires. The first time I saw him in the lobby of the East Side penthouse, the physical intensity of the man was almost a localized weather system. He was a giant, standing well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to take up the entire width of the hallway. He wasn't just large, he was dense, a mountain of controlled muscle and silent intent. What caught the eye, however, were the tattoos. They weren't the decorative ink of a hobbyist. They were deep, traditional, and dark, snaking up from beneath the cuffs of his bespoke white shirt and curling around his throat like a warning. They told a story of a life lived in the shadows, of debts paid in blood and loyalty forged in iron. He was dangerously silent. He didn't speak to the doorman. He simply looked at him, and the man stepped aside as if moved by an invisible hand. May Gay moved with the predatory grace of someone who had never known fear, or perhaps someone who had mastered it so completely it had become a weapon. I watched the security feed from my dashboard, my fingers hovering over the glass. There was something about the way he moved, the way he scanned the corners of the elevator, the way he stood with his back to the wall, that suggested he was never truly off the clock. He wasn't just a tenant. He was a soldier on a new front. The realization hit me 3 hours later when Shane returned home, his face the color of wet ash. He dropped his briefcase on the foyer table with a thud that sounded like a gavel.
"The board made a move today, Deb," he said, his voice hollow, stripped of its usual corporate vibrance. "They've brought in an outside consultant to evaluate the structural integrity of my department. It's a clean out. They're looking for a reason to cut me loose before the merger bonuses hit." I felt a cold prickle of recognition at the base of my spine. "What's his name, Shane?" "Ma Gay," Shane whispered, leaning against the wall as if the weight of the name alone was enough to crush him. "He's a ghost. No paper trail, no LinkedIn, just a trail of bankruptcies and fired CEOs in every city he touches. He's the board's personal hatchet man." The conflict settled in the pit of my stomach, hard and cold. The man sleeping in my penthouse, the man whose $15,000 monthly rent was currently being processed by my company, was the very man hired to destroy the life I had built with Shane. It was a classic checkmate, or so the board thought. They had hired a ghost to kill a career. What they didn't know was that the ghost was living in my house. They didn't know that every time Ma Gay turned his key in that lock, he was stepping into my territory. As I watched Shane pace the living room, already mourning a career that hadn't ended yet, I didn't feel fear. I felt a sharp, crystalline clarity. Ma Gay was a mountain, yes. He was a giant with ink on his skin and ice in his veins. But a mountain is only as strong as the ground beneath it. I sat back in my chair and pulled up the Bam Bam portal once more. I looked at the digital signature on the lease for Unit 12. I looked at the bank accounts Ma Gay had linked to his profile. He thought he was here to eliminate my husband. He didn't realize he was actually paying me for the privilege of his own destruction. The board had hired an executioner, but they had forgotten one vital thing. Even an executioner needs a place to lay his head. And in this city, I was the one who controlled the pillows. I turned off the monitor and walked into the kitchen to pour Shane a drink. I would let him worry for now. I would let the boards celebrate their cleverness. But as I stirred the ice, the sound reminded me of a clock ticking down. Ma Gay was under my roof, and in my house, I made the rules.
The dining room was bathed in the soft, deceptive glow of amber candlelight, the kind of lighting designed to make strangers feel like friends. Shane sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff, his smile practiced and desperate. He was doing exactly what he had been taught to do in business school: lean in, find common ground, humanize the adversary. He thought he was building a bridge. He had no idea he was inviting a wrecking ball into our sanctuary. Across from him sat the giant. My guy looked even more imposing in the intimate setting of our home. He sat perfectly still,
a dark monolith against the cream-colored walls. His sleeves were rolled just enough to reveal the black ink spiraling around his forearms, ancient-looking dragons and sharp geometric lines that seemed to pulse with every movement of his hands. He didn't eat much. He sipped his water and watched Shane with a gaze so steady it felt like a physical weight.
I moved between them like a ghost, playing the part I had perfected over a decade, the supportive, quiet, underestimated wife. I was the one who cleared the plates, the one who smiled at the right moments, the one who ensured the wine was poured, but never touched a drop myself. I let them believe I was background noise. I let them believe my only concern was the temperature of the sea bass and the crispness of the linens. But while Shane was talking about corporate culture and legacy, I was conducting a psychological autopsy. I watched the way Mallory Gay scanned the room. He wasn't looking at the family photos on the mantel. He was looking for the exits. He was measuring the distance between the table and the windows. He was a man who lived in a state of permanent tactical awareness. There was a specific coldness in his eyes when Shane spoke of loyalty to the firm. It wasn't just disagreement. It was a profound, quiet amusement. "The board speaks very highly of your precision, Mr. Gay," Shane said, his voice a pitch too high. "They say you see the things others miss." Mallory Gay's voice was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the floorboards. "Most people miss the truth because they are too busy looking at what they want to see. They look at the finish, the paint, the shine. I look at the rat."
Shane laughed, a dry, nervous sound. He didn't realize May Gay was talking about him. I leaned over to refill May Gay's glass, my movements fluid and humble. As I did, his jacket shifted, pulling tight against his frame. It was a momentary lapse, a fraction of an inch of exposure. But in the world of information asymmetry, a fraction is all you need. Attached to his belt, tucked discreetly behind a leather casing, was a small, sleek digital key fob. It wasn't a standard building pass. It was a high-frequency, military-grade encrypted device. I recognized the hardware instantly. It was a bespoke piece of tech issued exclusively to the executive tier of Apex Global, the rival corporation currently attempting a hostile takeover of Shane's firm. The air in my lungs turned to ice, but my hand remained steady. I didn't spill a drop. The board hadn't just hired a fixer to evaluate Shane. They had hired a Trojan horse. May Gay was a double agent. He was being paid by the board to dismantle the company from the inside, while simultaneously carrying the keys to the rival firm that intended to swallow the remains. He was the bridge between the betrayal and the takeover.
I stepped back into the shadows of the kitchen doorway, the tray heavy in my hands. I looked at my husband, good, honest, oblivious Shane, who was currently explaining his 5-year plan to the man who was already holding the keys to his execution. A wave of fierce, protective heat rose in my chest. May Guy thought he was the hunter. He thought he had entered a house of sheep. He saw a tired executive and a quiet wife, 2 victims waiting for the axe to fall. He had no idea that he was currently sitting in a room owned by his landlord. He had no idea that the very penthouse he returned to every night, the one where he felt most secure, was a node in my network. I returned to the table with the final course, my smile as sharp and invisible as a razor. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Guy?" I asked, my voice soft, the perfect pitch of domesticity. He looked up at me, his dark eyes meeting mine for the first time with real focus. For a second, just a second, the mask slipped. He saw a flicker of something in my gaze that didn't fit the underestimated wife persona. He saw a glimmer of the architect. "Everything," he said, his voice like grinding stone, "is exactly as I expected." He was wrong. He had no idea that while he was looking for the rot in Shane's company, I had already found the rot in him. The dinner party was over. The game had finally begun.
In the world of high-stakes corporate warfare, people expect the finishing blow to come from a whistleblower, a leaked memo, or a wiretap. They forget about the power of the fine print. They forget that the most indestructible men can be toppled by a few paragraphs of standard boilerplate. The morning after the dinner party, I didn't wake up as the supportive wife. I woke up as the CEO of Bam Bam. I traded my silk robe for a sharp charcoal blazer and a clinical focus. While Shane was at the office, likely presenting his soul to a man who had already priced it for sale, I was initiating a unit integrity and fire safety protocol. It's a standard move. Every high-end lease in the United States contains a clause regarding quiet enjoyment and, more importantly, residential use only. It is a legal boundary that seems mundane until you need to turn it into a cage. Property law is a beautiful, rigid thing. It dictates that a home is for living, not for the operation of an unregistered business. If you cross that line, you don't just violate a rule, you forfeit your sanctuary. I entered the penthouse with the Bam Bam lead agent, O'Lowen, trailing behind me. May Gay was out, likely sitting in Shane's boardroom, playing the part of the silent observer. The apartment was exactly as I expected, cold, minimalist, and surgically clean. It looked like a place where a man slept, not where a person lived. But I wasn't looking for the man. I was looking for the brokerage. Most people think of business use as a desk and a laptop. In the eyes of the law, and specifically under the strict zoning regulations of this zip code, it is about the registered business address. I moved toward the secondary bedroom, a room May Gay had requested be kept locked for security reasons. As the landlord, my right to inspect for safety overrides a tenant's desire for privacy, provided the proper notice is given. I signaled to O'Lowen, and the door clicked open. The room was a humming nerve center. It wasn't a bedroom, it was a shadow office. There were 3 high-speed server racks tucked into the closet, their cooling fans a low, aggressive drone. On the desk sat a dedicated Bloomberg terminal and a series of legal documents with the Apex Global seal. But the killing blow was a small framed certificate on the wall, a business license for MG Strategic Acquisitions, registered directly to this penthouse address.
He had made the one mistake a fixer cannot afford. He had become overconfident. He assumed the management company was a faceless entity that just collected checks. He didn't realize the landlord was someone with a vested interest in his failure. By registering his private consulting firm to a residential unit, my guy had committed a material breach of his lease. In New York, this is a strategic nuclear option. It doesn't just allow for an eviction, it allows for an immediate notice to cure, a legal ticking clock that creates a public record of fraud. If my guy was evicted for running a shadow brokerage while acting as a neutral consultant for Shane's board, his reputation would be incinerated. The rival firm, Apex Global, would drop him in a heartbeat to avoid the scandal. I stood in the center of the room, the blue light from the servers reflecting in my eyes. I felt a surge of cold, intellectual triumph. My guy thought he was the one evaluating structural integrity. He thought he was looking at the rot in Shane's career. But he was the one standing on a foundation that I was about to pull out from under him. "Document everything, O'Lowen," I said, my voice echoing in the sterile room. The serial numbers on the servers, the registration on that license, and the timestamps on those Apex files. I want a digital trail that he can't outrun. Property law is often seen as dry and bureaucratic, but when used correctly, it is a scalpel. The residential use only clause is designed to protect neighborhoods, but in my hands, it was a gag order. It was the leverage I needed to force a giant to his knees without ever having to raise my voice. I walked out of the penthouse and stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Shane was fighting for his life in a boardroom, unaware that the war had already been won in a quiet room with a humming server. My guy had paid $15,000 for this view. He had paid for the luxury of being untouchable. He had no idea that he had actually paid for the evidence of his own undoing. I pulled out my phone and sent a single encrypted message to my guy's private line. No subject, no greeting, just a photo of the MG Strategic Acquisitions license and a time and place for a meeting. The hunt was over. It was time for the summit.
The park was quiet, draped in the gray mid-morning light that makes the city feel like a sketch before the color is added. I chose a bench near the fountain, a space wide enough to prevent eavesdropping, but public enough to ensure a professional veneer. I arrived early. I wanted him to walk toward me. I wanted him to see me sitting there, composed and still, long before I saw him. When May Gay appeared, he didn't look like a tenant. He looked like a storm front. He was dressed in a dark overcoat that accentuated his massive frame, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He walked with a heavy, rhythmic pace that seemed to vibrate through the pavement. As he drew closer, I saw the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of those ice-cold eyes. He wasn't bored anymore. He was focused. He sat down on the far end of the bench, not looking at me, his gaze fixed on the water feature ahead. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic splashing of the fountain. "You have a very efficient management team, Mrs. Weston," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "They move fast. They see things they aren't meant to see." "Bam Bam prides itself on attention to detail," I replied. My voice was different now. The soft, melodic pitch I used at the dinner table was gone. It was replaced by something cooler, sharper, the voice of a woman who had spent a decade navigating the jagged edges of property law and asset protection. He turned his head slowly, studying me. He was looking for the underestimated wife he had met 36 hours ago. He didn't find her. He found the architect. "You own it," he stated. It wasn't a question. He had clearly done his own digging the moment he received my message. "The shell company, the holding group, the penthouse, it's all yours. Shane has no idea, does he?" "What Shane knows is that he has a wife who supports him," I said, meeting his gaze without blinking. "What you need to know is that you are currently in material breach of your lease agreement. Paragraph 18, subsection 4. No commercial registration or business operations on a residential premise. You didn't just break a rule, May Gay. You created a public liability for my firm, and I don't tolerate liability." May Gay let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh if there were any humor in his soul. "You're going to evict me over a zoning technicality? I'm a consultant for your husband's board. I can have his career ended by lunch. You're playing a very small game with a very large man."
"I'm playing the only game that matters," I countered, leaning in just enough to let him see the folder in my lap. If I file for an immediate eviction based on fraud and the operation of an unregistered shadow brokerage, the court records become public. The board will see that their neutral consultant is running a private firm out of a residential unit. But more importantly, the rival group you're carrying that encrypted key fob for, Apex Global, will see that you've been compromised. You aren't just an executioner anymore, my gay. You're a witness, and witnesses are expensive to keep. The air between us grew thick. I watched the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was a strategist. He knew how to weigh a loss. He realized I wasn't threatening his life. I was threatening his utility. In his world, a fixer who cannot be trusted is a fixer who ceases to exist. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "I want the truth in that boardroom," I said. "I know the board hired you to frame Shane so they could facilitate the Apex takeover. I know you have the evidence of their embezzlement tucked away in those servers in Unit 12. You're going to change your report. You're going to expose the board's corruption. You're going to make Shane the only viable candidate to lead the company through the merger." My gay looked back at the fountain. "And if I refuse, I can find another apartment. I can settle the legal fees." "It's not about the apartment," I said, my voice as cold as the February wind. "It's about the notice to cure. If I file it, I'll include the evidence of the Apex conflict of interest. I'll send it to the ethics committee of every firm you've ever worked for. You won't just be looking for a new apartment, you'll be looking for a new career in a city where nobody knows your name. You think you're a giant, my gay, but you're standing on my foundation, and I've decided the rent just went up." He was silent for a long time. I could see the tattoos on his neck pulsing with the rhythm of his breathing. He was a man who lived by a code of strength, and he had just been outmaneuvered by someone he had dismissed as background noise. Finally, he stood up. He loomed over me, a dark shadow that blocked out the sun. For a second, I wondered if he would break the rules of the summit, if he would reach out and end the negotiation with force. But my gay was a professional. He respected a superior move.
"Shane is a lucky man," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "He thinks he's the one protecting the house. He has no idea that he's living in a fortress built by a ghost." "He doesn't need to know," I replied, standing up to face him. "He needs to be successful. That's the deal." Maygay nodded once, a sharp military gesture. "The report will be corrected. The board will be purged. My lease, does it stand? As long as the servers are gone by Friday and the business license is moved to a commercial district, Unit 12 is yours," I said. "I'm a fair landlord, Maygay, as long as you follow the rules." He turned and walked away without another word, his dark coat billowing behind him. I sat back down on the bench and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. I had just tamed a giant with a piece of paper and a secret. Shane would go to work tomorrow expecting a funeral. Instead, he would find a coronation. He would think it was a miracle, a sudden shift in the winds of fate. He would never know that the wind had been directed by the woman who made his coffee and asked him about his day. I looked up at the east side skyline, at the windows of Unit 12 glinting in the distance. Real power isn't about the noise you make, it's about the silence you keep. And as the architect, my silence had never been more profitable.
Monday morning arrived with the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that precedes a storm. Shane spent an hour in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting a tie that was already perfect, his face a map of exhaustion and quiet resignation. He looked like a man walking toward his own end, a soldier preparing for a battle he had already been told he would lose. I kissed him goodbye at the door, my touch lingering just a second longer than usual, not out of pity, but as a silent anchor. "Whatever happens in that room today, Shane," I told him, "remember that foundations don't break, only the structures built on lies do." He nodded, not fully understanding, and disappeared into the elevator. I returned to my office, opened the Bam Bam portal, and watched the digital clock. The board meeting was scheduled at 10 o'clock. Across town, in a boardroom paneled in dark walnut and smelling of expensive leather and nervous sweat, the house of cards was beginning to fold. Thayer, the chairman of the board, sat at the head of the table. He was a man who had spent his life treating people like line items on a balance sheet. Next to him was Cressida, the lead analyst whose ambition had led her to facilitate the secret Apex global deal. They were smiling, the tight, predatory smiles of people who believe they have already won. Shane sat at the far end of the table, isolated, his laptop closed. He was ready for the axe. And then my guy walked in. He didn't take a seat. He stood at the front of the room, a massive dark silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked less like a consultant and more like a judge. He placed a single slim flash drive on the table. The tattoos on his hands were visible as he tapped the drive, a rhythmic sound that seemed to sync with the heartbeats of every person in the room. "Mr. Guy," Thayer said, leaning back with a smug sense of finality, "we've reviewed your preliminary notes. I assume you're ready to finalize the restructuring report and move forward with the termination of the executive leadership?" Shane lowered his head. He was waiting for the blow. My guy didn't look at Shane. He looked directly at Thayer. "I have completed the structural integrity audit, but the rot I found wasn't at the executive level. It was in the foundation." The smile on Thayer's face faltered. I don't follow." "In the course of my investigation," my guy's voice rumbled, sounding like grinding stone, "I discovered a secondary set of ledgers, encrypted files detailing a series of offshore transfers to an entity controlled by Apex Global. It appears that several members of this board have been intentionally devaluing this firm's assets to facilitate a hostile takeover in exchange for private equity positions." The room went dead. Shane looked up, his eyes wide, the first flicker of shock crossing his face. "That's preposterous," Cressida snapped, her voice trembling. "You were hired to evaluate the staff, not the board."
"I was hired to find the truth," Meigay replied. He projected a file onto the massive screen behind him, the very files I had seen in the penthouse. "This is the trail. It's a roadmap of embezzlement and corporate espionage. And at the center of the defense against this sabotage stands one man." He finally looked at Shane. "Shane Weston. My report concludes that Shane is the only individual whose strategies have prevented a total collapse of value over the last 18 months. He didn't fail the company. The company was being dismantled around him while he fought to hold it together. It was a masterstroke. Meigay didn't just save Shane. He turned Shane into the hero of a story Shane didn't even know he was in. The purge was instantaneous. By noon, the villains were being escorted from the building by private security. Thayer and Cressida left in a whirlwind of legal threats and frantic phone calls, their reputations decimated by the very fixer they had hired to do their dirty work. The remaining board members, terrified of being implicated and desperate for stability, did the only thing they could.
They promoted Shane to Chief Operating Officer with full autonomy to clean house. Shane came home 4 hours later. He didn't walk, he floated. He looked 10 years younger, his face flushed with a mixture of triumph and sheer disbelief. He threw his jacket on the sofa and caught me in a hug that nearly lifted me off the floor.
"Deb, you won't believe it," he gasped, his voice thick with emotion. "May Gay, he saved me. He didn't just save me, he exposed all of them. He told the board I was the only thing keeping the lights on. I've been promoted. We're safe. Everything we worked for, it's all safe." I held him, resting my head against his shoulder, smiling into the fabric of his shirt. "I told you, Shane, foundations don't break." "It was like a miracle," he whispered. "I don't know why he did it. He had no reason to help me. He's a giant, a ghost. Why would a man like that take a stand for me?" "Maybe he just respects a well-built structure," I said softly. Over his shoulder, I looked at my phone. A notification had just arrived from the Bam Bam portal. A wire transfer had cleared. $12,000 for the monthly rent of Unit 12. May Gay had kept his end of the bargain. He had dismantled the House of Cards and replaced it with a fortress. Shane was the king of that fortress now, and he would spend the rest of his life believing he had won the throne through sheer luck and professional integrity. I let him believe it. I would always let him believe it. Because as long as he believed in the light, I could continue to work in the shadows. The villains were gone, the promotion was signed, and the secret remained locked behind the doors of a penthouse Shane didn't even know we owned. The corporate flip was complete. The hand had moved, and the board was set. Now, it was time for the architect to enjoy the silence.
The city has a way of returning to its rhythm, as if the storms of the previous week never happened. From the balcony of our home, the skyline looks identical to how it did a month ago, a jagged horizon of glass and ambition. But for me, every light in those buildings now tells a different story. I know which foundations are cracked and which ones have been reinforced by hands no one will ever see. Shane is sleeping soundly in the other room, his breathing deep and unburdened for the first time in years. His new role as COO has brought a different kind of energy to his stride. He carries himself with the quiet confidence of a man who stood in the path of a hurricane and came out dry. He attributes his success to a sudden shift in corporate ethics and the mysterious, unexpected integrity of a man named May Guy. He believes in the miracle, and I will never be the one to tell him that miracles are just meticulously planned outcomes. I sit at my desk, the glow of the Bam Bam portal the only light in the room. A new notification appears, a maintenance request for Unit 12. It's a simple request, a filter replacement for the HVAC system, but it's signed with a level of professional courtesy that borders on reverence. May Guy is still there. He didn't flee the city, and he didn't fight the new terms of his residency. He is now the model tenant. The servers are gone. The shadow brokerage has been moved to a commercial district in the city's outskirts, and the digital key fob for Apex Global has been destroyed. He remains in the penthouse, a giant who has learned the true definition of power. He knows that I am watching, not through cameras or wires, but through the very walls he sleeps within. He answers to me now, a silent guardian of my husband's interests, a debt-bound soldier in a war that Shane doesn't even know is being fought. People often ask what the secret is to a long, happy marriage. They speak of honesty, of total transparency, of sharing every burden. I listen to them and I smile, but I do not agree. Absolute transparency is a vulnerability. If Shane knew the lengths I went to, If he knew that his miracle was bought with a lease violation and a strategic threat, the purity of his world would shatter. He would no longer be the man of the light. He would see the shadows everywhere, and that is a weight I refuse to let him carry. I chose this path. I chose to be the invisible hand. There is a peace in this house that money cannot buy, but it is a peace that requires constant maintenance. It requires the ability to look the person you love in the eye and hold back a truth that would change everything, not to deceive them, but to preserve them. I protect his innocence because it is the most beautiful thing about him. I protect his American dream because it is the engine that keeps him moving forward. My foundation is solid, the accounts are full, the properties are secure, and the giant in Unit 12 is tamed. I have built a fortress around our life, brick by brick, secret by secret. I am the landlord of his reality, and as long as the checks clear and the city remains quiet, the structure will hold. I close my laptop and listen to the silence of the apartment. It's a heavy, expensive silence, the kind that only comes when you have successfully navigated the jagged edges of a world that tries to break you. Some people find silence lonely. I find it profitable. It is the armor I wear to keep our world soft. In the end, power isn't about the noise you make or the credit you take. It's about the keys you hold and the stories you choose never to tell. I will take this secret to my grave, and in exchange, Shane will live a life of light and triumph. After all, silence is the most expensive asset you can own.